While the Marines of the 3rd Division were establishing themselves on Bougainville in the final thrust of Operation Cartwheel, in the Central Pacific, the 2nd Marines were preparing to launch their campaign through the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. The first blows would fall at Macon Island in the northern Gilberts and at Batio Island in the central Gilberts atoll of Tarawa, destined to become the scene of some of the most concentrated fighting in the Pacific campaign. As a battleground, the islands of the Central Pacific were a world removed from the dense jungles and mountainous terrain encountered in the Southwest Pacific. Relatively flat and sparsely vegetated, their strategic value as sites for airstrips was unquestioned.
The entire Pacific War was pretty much based on the distances of fighters going two ways and having some operational time left over whatever target they were attacking.
Within the range of established American bases, Tarawa's location made it a logical stepping stone toward the ultimate goal of Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. U.S. Naval and Marine Corps commanders saw Tarawa as an opportunity to fine-tune amphibious tactics as a prelude to the main event.
The basic problem for the Marines and landing is one of coordination of fires and follow-on support with those forces that land initially. Somebody will always get to the beach. The question is, can you keep him there? Any ideas that you have can only be resolved under fire. And the Tarawa operation was the great test of the Marine Corps landing doctrine.
Each one of you is much better than the Jap. You're better physically, you're better mentally, you have better weapons, you're going to have better support, so that you're going to be able to lick him hands down when it comes to individual fighting.
Let me repeat again what the general said. If you have to run any chances whatsoever to get a prisoner, then don't get him.
Embarking from bases in New Zealand and Pearl Harbor, some 35,000 soldiers and Marines had been rigorously trained for the coming operation. Sailing across the vast expanse of the Pacific toward the Gilbert Islands, the task force numbered nearly 200 ships, among them 10 new Essex-class carriers and 7 escort carriers. Transports carrying the assault troops were ringed by an awesome collection of cruisers, destroyers, and battleships. Aboard the troop ships, the routine of preparation begins.
Well, it was just a routine ship bit, doing exercise, standing in line, cleaning weapons, griping, first one thing to another.
They showed us the topographic maps and pictures and stuff like that. And of course, they had us so overconfident of the fact that we're just going to be able to go and stab them. And some of the last words from Colonel Amy was that the code name for BDO was Helen. He said, we're going to get to Helen, and I wouldn't miss it for anything.
They're talking about all the bombs and all the shells that were going to be there, and it was going to eliminate just like a coconut tree is going to be cut down like running a mower through a sickle through a wheat field. And we had the Japs so groggy what was left. One of us would take a piece of chalk, and one would take a bayonet, and one would mark him, the other would stick him.
The Americans were confident that the invasion would be a walkover. However, 24 hours later, a lot of these young men were dead.
The island of Batio had been built up actually over the previous year by, I can only describe as Japanese naval infantry engineering geniuses. This was probably the best defended island shoreline through 1944. This is late 43, but through 1944, the next really good defensive plan was Iwo Jima.
The Japanese had labored hard to fortify Batio's 291 square acres. A seawall of coconut logs designed to stop tracked vehicles was backed by numerous fortified machine gun and artillery installations.
Most of the guns were set for firing over the northern part of the island. They had anti-boat defenses set up that would force the boats to go around and then channelize them into machine gun lanes and anti-boat artillery lanes.
Additionally, the elite infantrymen of the Special Naval Landing Force, or Japanese Marines, were sent to garrison the island.
These are the best Japanese troops the Marines or anybody in the Pacific faced from start to finish. These guys were formidable foes. And it's a good thing we met them that early because we based our training and the dedication of firepower on future landings to that level, and the Japanese in any other landing never met that level. So we not only overwhelmed them, we double overwhelmed them by taking into account the best that we met at Tarawa and never meeting them again.
A test is in the offing for the Marines, and it will be severe. As the assault force neared its objective, carrier planes subjected Baitio Island to an unrelenting series of attacks.
They thought they'd done a great job. One Navy Hellcat pilot who was pummeling the island said that the first day we got there, it was a tropical paradise. By the time the Marines ran it, it looked like an ashtray. So the looks were deceiving. Very few of the Japanese positions were taken out. Some of the large guns were, but none of the troop positions worth mentioning.
As night fell on D-1, pilots returning to their carriers had done all they could. Tomorrow, it was up to the Marines. November 20th, D-Day.
The Navy had a number of battleships out there, including a few that had been in Pearl Harbor, and they were pounding the island. The island was dead flat. What they didn't realize was that the heavy shells were not fired at a high enough angle and were caroming across the island. They weren't actually exploding on the island, but from the view of the gunnery on the ships, they saw the explosions about where they should be, except they were past the island. So a lot of rounds didn't penetrate because they didn't have high enough angle of fire.
To the Marines circling in landing craft, waiting for the run-in, it seemed that nothing could live through the preparation the island was subjected to.
Everybody was amazed at the 16-inch shells going through the air and the red glow on them and hitting the island and exploding, and we watched this on our way in. And
the bombardment wasn't meant so much to destroy, although that was fine, just to stun the Japanese so that they couldn't get back up and shoot, or were afraid to get back up and shoot as the Marines were making the last stage in, because the Marines were most vulnerable the last 100, 200 yards into the beach.
Yet just moments after the barrage is lifted, Japanese shells begin dropping around the incoming landing craft.
Some of the old boys down on the canal, they sort of shook their head and seen a lot of gunfire and a lot of things about it. And of course, over the years later, well, I learned that a lot of these big guns make an awful lot of noise, but sometimes it don't kill many nips.
800 yards from the shore, the assault reaches the shallow reef, and the Amtraks begin wading over it.
You could hear the clanging, you could see the tracers. I mean, just hear metal hitting metal. So we went over the side and see there's a young kid there, Ragsdale. Ragsdale got, I think, just got shot in midair because the time we fell beside him, well, he was dead. Of course, we ducked behind the wall to start with, and Cookie turned to me, the gunner Sergeant Cook, and he had a wild, white look in his eye, and he said, I got it. He said, canal was never like this. And we started over that wall, and Cookie was dead. Bam, I don't know what he is. I think I shot right square through the head. And then Moore, Bay Moore, was another nice stuff. Moore, somewhere at Moulton Home. Well, Moore's section leader, he got shot. So Nelson, who was my platoon, my squad leader, he got shot. I reckon I had 18 men of them. I say 18, 15, 16, 17 that got off from that Amtrak. Probably in about, last time I'm telling you about it, about 4 or 5 of them were dead, and 3 or 4 of them were wounded.
Higgins boats, following the Amtraks in, grounded on the edge of the lagoon's reef, easy targets for Japanese guns.
when our boat hit the reef, we got out, and then we, most of us then started swimming to our right over to the pier. So you could get over where we were landed, while we could go through the pilings and up the other side. And that's what our whole group did. I don't know how many people we lost in the water, but it must have been a fantastic number, because when we got to the beach, there were very few of our group left. And these other fellows were trying to come in, and you could see them wading in, and that fire was just, well, it was terrible, terrible just to look at them. There wasn't anything we'd do about them. You couldn't just run out there and knock all the pillboxes out.
The landing had become hopelessly snarled and confused as leaders were killed or wounded. No unit arrived ashore intact.
And one company lost every one of its officers, 5 killed, 1 seriously wounded. Other companies had low casualties. Some companies that got inland, got a good hold inland and were able to hold areas, which gave the succeeding waves some operating room. But the survival rate amongst the first waves was really a matter of luck, where they landed, even in some cases, if they landed.
The area of the lagoon was a scene of utter carnage and complete confusion.
This is probably maybe the only invasion in World War II done by the U.S. that a real strong counterattack could have thrown the U.S. off the beaches. I mean, it was that bad.
Burned out Amtraks and the corpses of dead Marines littered the beach, while many who had made it to shore were too stunned to act.
They hadn't reached the point yet where the shock had worn off enough for them to start making things up as they went along. The plan was arrived, but they didn't have a plan B. And just charging ahead was only getting people killed. So the attack stalled right there, maybe a few yards inland at tops.
In the chaos ashore, the fate of the assault rested on the shoulders of the few able-bodied Marines available.
Whatever the plan was initially, the plan goes awry when people don't land where they're supposed to, when critical command elements get wiped out or destroyed early on. A lot of the fighting now comes down to individual squads and platoons deciding on their own what has to be done and setting about doing it.
There was no easy way to knock out the intricately placed Japanese positions. They had to risk their lives even to move. Again, natural leaders rose to the challenge, and move they did.
Even though I was a PFC at that time, I think I did have pretty good control of everybody who was there in my vicinity, and we worked together as a group. And I took the wounded guys and I pulled them against the seawall, facing out to the pillbox, and I gave them all their rifles, and that was what their job was. Every time that the machine gun tried to open up on the beach, they were to shoot into the hull. Then I went out there a couple of times and tried to throw hand grenades in, but being it was about I'd say 9 to 10 feet high, my jumping up and even trying to throw hand grenades was a couple near misses, and a couple of times I landed in the water right next to me. But I had to give it up after a while.
What mattered there was performance. What mattered was getting up, going over the seawall, in spite of the fact that you had to pass through 3 bodies of people you might have known who had been killed trying to do exactly the same thing 10 minutes before. So this is where individual heroism, I mean, the best kind of individual heroism takes over. This is where people find out what they are. Okay, this isn't organized. This isn't getting up and making a bayonet attack like in World War I. It's a different kind of heroism. Okay, this is individual heroism, not herd heroism. So every time a position was taken, it was an opening. The Marines could take advantage of that because they had momentum on their side, and the Japanese were basically stalled. They had positions to defend. They weren't in communication. They didn't know what to do. They needed to be commanded. I mean, sergeants didn't make decisions. Lieutenants didn't make decisions. So you have a flexible kind of operation on one side and a very rigid kind of operation on the other. And the Marines are as hierarchical as the Japanese at this point, but they just have a different culture. They're just going to fall back on themselves because that's the way they were raised.
At dawn of the second day, the issue was still in doubt. Marines who had waited in landing craft for 20 hours finally began wading ashore. Bullets and shells flew at them from every direction as Japanese suicide squads had set up machine guns in a burned-out freighter and wrecked Amtraks during the night. Through water tinged red from the blood of their comrades, the Marines grimly moved forward.
By then, they were determined not to be pushed back. Too many people had died on the beach for them to pull out and leave them. It just became completely a matter of honor.
It was around noon on D+1 when the battle finally began to turn. A rising tide allowed Higgins boats to pass over the reef and reach shore where fresh men and supplies were badly needed. Foot by foot, position by position, the Marines of the bloodied 2nd Division pushed the determined Japanese back. Slowly, they were gaining the upper hand.
They started reorganizing themselves, and they were a fundamentally fresh force. They had experienced people ahead and with them, that's to say, members of the 2nd Marines, to tell them, scouts, people who understood by then. And they were able to take out positions and slowly but surely be able to work into positions from which they could take the other defended places out from side attacks, rear attacks, and so forth. So as you gain more ground, you're taking out machine guns from interlocking bands of fire. They're not interlocking anymore, so you have clear ways in from either side and brave men to do it. It built its own momentum.
On the morning of D+2, mortars and the lone tank operating near Red 3 finally silenced the guns protecting one side of a large Japanese command bunker. The highest point on the island, attacks over the previous 2 days had been turned back, but now the Marines had an avenue of approach. A group of assault engineers, led by Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman, clawed their way up the rounded, sand-covered side.
As they hit the top, door popped open, Japanese poured out, probably a dozen or two. Bonnyman stayed on his knees and fired his carbine, 15-round carbine, to keep the Japanese down. The Marine engineers threw a couple blocks of explosives at them, and then everybody hit the deck. Somebody yelled grenade. A grenade went off. None of them were hurt, except Bonnyman had been shot and was killed. He was just laying there. He was dead. But he stopped the Japanese long enough, or at least made them falter long enough, for more guys to come up the back. And as everybody was watching, firing, chaos, the Marine with the flamethrower went to the ventilators and just poured flaming fuel down those and burned most of them to a crisp. So that's how the bunker was taken, and that was the big break, because they had the high ground, as it were. They could see, for the first time they had a vista. They had the protection of this bunker. They could move behind it now. They were free to mass and so forth. And from there, the battalions on the beach, the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, and the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, all mixed together, were able to start pushing down the beach.
Accompanied by tanks, the Marines swept along the southern shore to link up with other Marines who had crossed the airfield the day before. By nightfall, the western end of Baitio was controlled by the Americans, yet hundreds of Japanese were still dug in on the island's eastern end. With all hope of relief gone, they organized themselves to attack.
Basically, this was it. It was do or die now. They attacked. This is the big attack that broke their backs. There were not enough left of them to the next morning when the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, fresh, hadn't fired a shot basically, passed through the 1st Battalion. They made it to the long end of the island within a very short period of time, and the battle ended.
As Marines moved cautiously over the island, digging any remaining Japanese positions out one by one, a lone Navy Hellcat touched down on Baitio, the first American plane to land on the newly won airfield. At 1:10 p.m. on D+3, 76 hours after the assault had begun, Baitio was declared secure. More than 4,500 Japanese had died in defense of Baitio. Only 17 Japanese and 129 Korean laborers were taken prisoner. U.S. casualties were light in comparison, but shocking to a nation unaccustomed to the savagery of war.
took the deaths at Tarawa to wake everybody up. If Tarawa had been a walkthrough, something would have happened later at an equivalent scale. It just gave the American public its first real inkling that this is a different kind of war. It was going to cost a lot of lives.
Perhaps the worst thing about Tarawa was the rate of casualties, which probably nobody was fully prepared to accept. The initial landing force loses about 1,000 men killed, another 2,000 wounded. Out of a 4,000 man initial landing force, that's a lot of casualties. This causes the Marines to have to go back and to do a lot of reassessment, rethinking their training, developing some new equipment, and preparing for subsequent landings in the future.
The lessons learned at Tarawa had come at a terrible cost, but resulted in changes in amphibious doctrine that would save countless lives in the months to come.
Sometime, maybe a bunch of fellows will die, save a lot more. Maybe the lesson learned there of what little damage that bombarding and air bombing and like did might have saved many lives in the Marshalls and Iwo Jima and some of these other fellas, because they learned that a lot of smoke and a lot of noise and a few dropping of bombs and looking like you done blown hell out of everything done damn little damage. So in that respect, I think it was probably worthwhile.